On the day Dulcie Price returned to the country, Lance Wood filled the city with roses to celebrate her return. Once again, rumors about our relationship went viral. Lance's beloved Dulcie is back. Won't Annie Olsen, the substitute, be doomed? She deserves it. A substitute should end up like this. I feel disgusted just looking at her pretending to be innocent. I sat in the nanny car, scrolling through the comments section, and then turned off my phone. Are you angry? Lance Wood, sitting beside me, turned his head and spoke in a calm tone. Ding! Wisnovel reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. I shook my head and leaned my face against his shoulder, behaving obediently. I'm just a little jealous. But when I think about how you'll take me home before seeing Miss Price, I'm not jealous anymore. Lance was very satisfied with my reaction. He reached out and scratched my chin like scratching a kitten. Good girl. I won't go back tonight. The maid Tracy will make bird's nest soup for you. Eat it and go to bed early. The car stopped at the entrance of the villa. I pushed open the car door and got out. Pausing for a second under the streetlight, I suddenly turned back and threw myself into Lance's arms. Tears poured down like rain. I know I can never compare to Miss Price, and I never thought about it. With closed eyes, I tried to hide the sobbing in my voice. But, Lance, don't abandon me. Don't leave me. My hot tears soaked his shirt fabric, sticking to his chest. He paused for a moment, and his warm palm fell on my slender back, gently patting it. No, I won't. Lance pinched my chin and lifted it, looking at my tear-stained face with a hint of darkness in his eyes. Then he leaned in and kissed me passionately, biting with great force. He didn't stop until he tasted the metallic tang of blood. Annie, be good. I'll come to see you tomorrow. I rested in his arms, breathing heavily with excitement. Okay, but remember, you must never deceive me. After a tender moment, I wiped my red eyes and got out of the car once again. This time, the black Rolls-Royce didn't stop for a moment and disappeared in a flash. It was getting late, and if he didn't hurry, he would miss the welcoming banquet for Dulcie Price. She was the young miss of the Price family, used to being the center of attention. If Lance Wood was late, she would definitely be angry with him. As I thought about this, I walked into the villa. In front of the maid, Tracy, I ate spoonfuls of the bird's nest soup she had stewed. Then, with tear stains on my face, I locked the door and went upstairs. I rushed into the bathroom, knelt by the toilet, and vomited until everything turned dark. It was so nauseating. Every second I spent with Lance Wood, every breath he exhaled, carried the rotten scent of decadence. Just thinking about it made me want to vomit. But I still had to act coquettish with him, kiss him, and sleep with him. Make him firmly believe that I was a soft and helpless vine with no other choice but to cling to him and love him wholeheartedly. And then, when he least expected it, deliver a fatal blow. Lance Wood, you will pay a bloody price. As I continued to vomit, my mouth went numb and a sour bitterness filled it. I lay on the cold ground, looking at the brightly lit ceiling, with my vision blurred by the light. I raised my hand to cover my eyes and sobbed. But, Kevin, I have no other choice. I miss you so much. When I was 10 years old, my dad, who was a heavy drinker and abusive, passed away. My mom remarried a local businessman who was in the clothing business. To please her new husband, she locked me in my stepfather's room. Through the door, she coldly comforted me as I cried uncontrollably. Annie, be good and listen to Uncle Marz. Tomorrow, Mommy will buy you some candy. She stopped halfway through her sentence. The next second, the locked door was forcefully kicked open. A tall teenager stood at the doorway, wearing a faded school uniform, looking disdainfully at everything in the room. So filthy. Those two words seemed to enrage Uncle Marz. Ignoring his disheveled appearance, he grabbed a cup from the bedside table and threw it at the teenager. Kevin Marz, you are the result of your mother's affair. Yuri, not even my biological child. How dare you say such things? Kevin Marz didn't flinch. The glass cup hit his forehead, immediately drawing blood. Seemingly impervious to pain, he walked into the room with an expressionless face, picked me up from the corner of the bed, and walked towards the door. As he passed by my mom, he paused for a moment. Since he despises me as a bastard, you should have given birth to his biological child earlier. Don't use your own daughter to please him. That was the first time I met my stepbrother, Kevin Marz. That night, I dreamt of Kevin again. I turned of the year when I was 16 and he took a break from school and worked to support my education. When I found out about it, we had a big fight. Kevin, I don't need you to sacrifice yourself. I'm not your real sister. My mom and your dad never even got married. You don't have to go this far for me. As I said this, my voice trembled uncontrollably. It's not that I didn't appreciate it. I was just afraid that one day he would regret it. But he just hugged me and gently stroked my hair to comfort me. Annie, I won't regret it. We can't choose our family background, but we can choose our own family. You are the sister I chose. What I didn't tell him was that I didn't want to be his sister at all. I was a pervert. I had such dirty and shameful thoughts about my stepbrother. I wanted to wait. Wait until I turned 18. Wait until his life was no longer sacrificed for me. 2 months later, my brother told me that he got a job opportunity to work as a steward on a private yacht, earning $2,000 a day. He told me that with this money, he would come back home and continue his studies. But when he was brought back, he was already a lifeless body. His bones were shattered, mixed with flesh and blood. They said, Kevin Marz had an argument and fought with someone on the yacht, and then he died. The killer has already jumped into the sea out of fear. They also said that out of humanitarianism, the owner of the yacht would compensate me with $50,000. I couldn't hear anything, as if I had lost all my senses, staring at the body of my stepbrother in front of me. The sunlight mixed with blood formed a colorful and mottled scene. Kevin didn't die from a fight. He earned money for me, so how could he have conflicts with others? It was the owner of the yacht, his white moonlight, Dulcie Price, who flirted with him and deliberately poured wine on Kevin, teasing him. Dulcie Price said Kevin had a good figure and wanted to flirt with him. After the owner of the yacht reconciled with Dulcie, he had someone beat Kevin to death. Dulcie said he had a good figure? Then let's break every bone in his body. Throughout the whole process, only one lawyer dealt with this matter. The owner of the yacht never even showed up. It was said that after he made up with his white moonlight, Dulcie Price, he accompanied her to Hokkaido for skiing. Months later, I finally learned his name. Lance Wood, the son of a prominent figure in J-City. I didn't expect to meet Dulcie Price so soon. But she's used to being arrogant, how could she tolerate it? She had only been abroad for 2 years, and Lance Wood has already added another woman beside him. So the next day, she came to the set with Lance, holding his hand. I was filming a drowning scene. Dulcie watched with interest for a while, then suddenly sneered. I heard you won Best Actress last month, is this your acting? She was clearly trying to make things difficult for me. This film was invested by Lance, so the director carefully sought his opinion. Mr. Wood, what do you think? Lance comfortingly patted Dulcie's hand and said calmly, let's reshoot until it's perfect. He was here to help Dulcie vent her anger. Everyone understood this, including me. In the cold autumn weather, I jumped into the icy lake over and over again. My costume was soaked in cold water, weighing heavily on my body, causing my bones to ache. I was so cold that my lips had no trace of color, as if all the blood in my body had frozen. Dulcie finally showed mercy and let me go. This acting can be considered passable. I crawled out of the lake, dripping wet. Humbly, I bent down and said, as long as Miss Price is satisfied. When I stood up again, there were water droplets on my eyelashes, accentuating my pale face, making me look pitiful. Lance's gaze uncontrollably fell on my face, and his Adam's apple moved. My manager, Shelley, rushed over with a blanket and was about to wrap it around me when she suddenly screamed, blood! Annie, your leg is bleeding. I looked down and saw a small spot of red on my skirt. The cold, sharp pain in my lower abdomen that I had deliberately ignored for the past hour finally resurfaced. I looked at Lance, who was walking towards me with determined steps and no longer had a cold expression on his face. Suddenly, tears streamed down my face in panic. What should we do, Lance? It seems like we've lost our child. Lance Wood, who had always been cold and aloof in front of me, was now displaying an unprecedented loss of composure. The hospital ward was filled with the pungent smell of disinfectant. Lance tightly held my cold hand and took a deep breath. Why didn't you tell me earlier? A good card should be played at the most critical moment to be most effective. I lowered my eyes and smiled sarcastically where he couldn't see. When I raised my face again, all that remained in my eyes was despair and grief. I was afraid. I knew Dulcie Price was coming back, and you belonged to her. I had planned to finish this film and quietly leave with our child. You want to break up with me? I closed my eyes, and tears uncontrollably spilled out. Yes. Who gave you the authority to make decisions on your own? Suddenly, Lance laughed in anger and lifted my chin with his hand. Annie Olsen, in this world, there is no one who can control me. Without my permission, you can't leave my side. That evening, Lance didn't go to accompany Dulcie Price as usual. He stayed in the hospital room and watched over me all night. The nurse gave me a painkiller injection. Under the effect of the medication, I quickly fell asleep. In a daze, I dreamed of Kevin. When I was 12, Uncle Marz lost everything at the gambling table. He went bankrupt. To fight over a piece of gold jewelry that my mom had hidden, they got into a physical fight. In the midst of the struggle, both of them accidentally fell into the river. Only Kevin and I were left in the family. My mom and Uncle Marz were never officially married. Legally, I had no relationship with Kevin at all. In the funeral home, I looked at my stepbrother expressionlessly, waiting for him to tell me to leave. But instead of telling me to go, he reached out and gently touched my head. Annie, why aren't you crying? There's nothing to cry about. He sighed, but with so many eyes watching, you should at least pretend to be sad. I couldn't do it. For so many years, my mom had been cold towards me like that. When she died, I felt relieved. Finally, I spoke and asked Kevin, "Are you going to send me away?" "Why would I send you away?" He hesitated for a moment. Then, as if suddenly realizing something, he squatted down and picked me up. "Annie, you are my little sister." Because I had always been underfed, I was thin and small. Being held in his arms, I felt weightless, as if there was no burden at all. Kevin Marz tightened his arms, holding me even tighter. "No matter what happens, I will never abandon you." After the burial of those two, he took me back to that empty house. The night was desolate, with a chilling wind howling past. But Kevin held my hand tightly and never let go. The stars were sparse in the night sky, and the warmth of his hand was scorching. I thought that would be forever. Because of the miscarriage, I stayed in the hospital for a week. During this time, a video of me jumping into the lake was exposed, and I didn't know who leaked it. Soon, it became a hot topic. The person who exposed it even hinted that I was forced by Dulcie Price. Although mistress doesn't sound good, she's the official girlfriend now. I sent Dulcie Price more like the third party? The temperature has been below freezing recently. Will this kind of ordeal really kill someone? Miss Price is so disgusting. She doesn't dare to confront men, she only goes after women, right? In Lance's office, Dulcie Price had a big argument with him. Dulcie sneered repeatedly. I just wanted to teach her a lesson. A counterfeit like her from a remote place, does she even deserve to be my substitute? She's just pretending to be pitiful. She lost the baby, so what? Does she want me to pay with my life? Dulcie, I've let you do whatever you wanted since we were young. Lance said calmly, but everything should have its limits, and you shouldn't be too spoiled. I'm spoiled? Dulcie seemed to be provoked by these words. Lance would. Do you remember what you said to me before I went abroad? You said that it was only 2 years, and you could wait for me. As she spoke, her eyes gradually turned red. It was only 2 years. Then why, as soon as I returned, did you have that disgusting woman by your side? I don't believe you haven't seen what they've been saying about me online these past few days. Lance Wood, what exactly do you think of me? Tears welled up in her eyes, and her once glamorous and confident face showed a rare trace of confusion and vulnerability. For Lance, who had grown up with her since childhood, this was fatal. And so, his previously cold expression gradually softened. After a moment, he walked up to Dulcie and embraced her. I love you. His voice became deep. Dulcie, don't doubt my feelings for you. No one in this world can replace you. I watched the two people embracing each other on the surveillance footage. Expressionless, I turned off the screen of my phone. The camera was from the last time Lance brought me into his office. I took the opportunity when he was distracted by his emotions and secretly installed it. I had long suspected that Dulcie wouldn't be so easy to deal with. Her relationship with Lance had deepened over the past decade, but it wasn't invincible. Now, I have planted a bomb of emotions in their hearts with my own flesh and blood. One day in the future, this emotional bomb will explode when it's time to detonate. I woke up and suddenly the trending topics had changed. A segment of the video after that one was also exposed. It showed my skirt stained with blood, the wet fabric spreading the stain. The comments exploded. What's going on? Is she on her period? Whose period causes so much bleeding? Clearly, it's a miscarriage. Pregnant before marriage, how disgusting. Boycott her. When Lance came to see me, he appeared as usual. He didn't mention it, and I pretended not to notice, just like before, obediently discussing trivial matters on set with him. Occasionally, I would innocently tug at his sleeve and make some harmless requests. I tried my best to appear normal. Until midnight. He woke up from his dreams and found an empty bed beside him. He found me on the balcony, curled up in a thin nightgown in the cold night breeze. I bit my arm tightly, tears streaming down my face in a mess. Annie. I looked up and saw him, hastily wiping away my tears and forcing a smile. Lance, why are you awake? He stared into my eyes under the moonlight, and in his gaze, my forced emotions finally collapsed. I'm sorry, I just miss my child. I know it's not Miss Price's fault, it's just that I can't get over it. It's okay, just give me a few days alone. A hint of guilt flashed in his eyes. Then he reached out and pulled me into his embrace. His fingertips gently brushed the bite mark on my arm that was bleeding. But it's not your fault either. I spoiled her. Annie, let me take you out to relax. Let's forget about this, okay? When he called me, he usually used my full name. It was rare for us to be so intimate. I knew very well that even if Lance felt a bit guilty towards me, he wouldn't actually do anything to Dulcie Price. His idea of taking me out to relax was just his one-sided compensation. But it didn't matter. All I wanted was his temporary absence. Lance took me on a yacht and stayed on a private island under his name for a few days. He accompanied me snorkeling, fishing, and watched dolphins leaping out of the sea at sunset. It was a picturesque scenery that I had never seen in so many years. In the splashing crystal water, Lance asked me, Annie, are you feeling better? I hesitated for a few seconds before nodding gently. He noticed my hesitation. That night, after I fell asleep in the room, Lance went to the garden and answered a call from Dulcie. Lance, where are you? Are you out with that bitch Annie again? Her voice was sharp on the phone. Tomorrow is my birthday, and you promised to celebrate with me. Annie lost her child. I have to accompany her to relax. Lance said impatiently, it's just a birthday, does it really matter? He hung up the phone and looked up to see me, rubbing my sleepy eyes, standing at the door, watching him. Lance, why are you downstairs so late? Because I was half asleep, my voice sounded a bit groggy. I woke up and didn't see you, I thought. What did you think? His gaze dropped and landed on my bare feet. He furrowed his brows slightly. On such a cold day, why are you running around without shoes? He scolded softly and walked up to me in big strides, lifting me up horizontally. I curled up in his arms, instinctively wrapping my arms around his neck, and whispered softly, I thought, you didn't want me anymore. Lance, I've already lost our child, I can't lose you too. His arms holding mine stiffened slightly. His gaze fell on my fragile and dependent expression, and a surge of affection gradually appeared. Lance held me tighter, his voice sounding like a promise. No, Annie. I will never leave you. Lance Wood was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, a true prodigy. Deep down, he was extremely arrogant and self-centered. He couldn't tolerate anyone defying or provoking him, even if that person was Dulcie Price, the white moonlight he had loved for many years and grew up with. So in his heart. On one hand, there was Dulcie Price, who relied on their old relationship and frequently picked fights with him, waiting for him to give in. On the other hand, there was me, who was obedient and never blamed him, even when we lost our child, fearing that he would leave me. The scales were gradually tipping towards one side, and it was already clear. It was when Lance and I returned that we found out something had happened to Dulcie Price. At her birthday banquet, she got heavily drunk because Lance didn't show up. She even went out for a joyride. As a result, she hit a pedestrian, causing the person to die on the spot. She had always thought that she could solve any problem with money, but this time she had run into a tough situation. The deceased was the beloved youngest son of a powerful figure. Out of grief and anger, the other party demanded that Dulcie Price pay with her life. When Lance returned and saw that the situation was about to go viral, Dulcie cried in front of him, tears streaming down her face. Lance, you have to save me. It wasn't intentional. Besides, it's just one person. If he die, he die. Am I going to pay with my life for this? She had said the exact same words when I lost my child. The buried bomb was detonated. Separated by a glass window, Lance looked at her deeply. Then he said lightly, "Don't be afraid, I will take care of it." He took decisive action, using ruthless means to suppress the matter and force the other party to settle with the leverage he had on them. Under such circumstances, Dulcie still wanted to give him the cold shoulder. Lance was getting tired of her endless arrogance. Dulcie couldn't understand why his attitude towards her had turned cold over just one insignificant life, as if it didn't matter. Because Lance had used his connections to solve her trouble, he was now at the mercy of others. His half-brother, Henry Wood, took advantage of the situation and snatched several projects from him. The Wood family had more than just Lance Wood in this generation. Every one of them was ambitious. That evening, I finished work on the set. I got into the nanny car. My agent said, "Annie, Mr. Wood wants me to tell you that he has something to take care of tonight, so just wait for him at home." I absent-mindedly looked at the lights outside the window for a while, then snapped back to reality and smiled. "I'm not in a hurry to go home now. Shelley, I want to go somewhere." The car stopped at a discreet private restaurant, and I walked through a small bridge and a winding corridor. In the innermost private room, Henry Wood was waiting for me. After finishing the meal, I stood up and walked towards the exit. Henry followed behind me and politely said, "Thanks to you today, Miss Olsen. Let me walk you out." I stopped abruptly after opening the door, leaving him confused. He instinctively repeated, "Miss Olsen? Annie Olsen." Suddenly, a familiar cold and sharp voice came from outside the door. It was Lance Wood. Under the warm yellow lights of the corridor stood Lance, his expression icy, and Dulcie by his side, unable to conceal her smugness. "Lance, I told you, Annie Olsen is suspicious." The faint warmth emitted by the lights was not enough to dispel the coldness in Lance's eyes. His gaze briefly passed over Henry Wood behind me, then fixed directly on my face. "Annie Olsen, you better give me an explanation." My face turned pale, and I took a deep breath, gripping the doorknob and lowering my head. "I'm sorry. Don't pretend to be pitiful, that trick doesn't work anymore," Dulcie sneered. "I knew it. Why did trouble arise for the Wood family as soon as Lance took you out? Even I got into trouble. It turns out you had already hooked up with Henry Wood and were plotting behind our back." With every word she spoke, Lance's gaze towards me became sharper. In the end, his eyes became like whirlpools, bottomless and dark. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" Seeing that I remained silent, Dulcie grew even more smug. "Are you so speechless that you can't even come up with an excuse?" As soon as she finished speaking, Lance suddenly grabbed my wrist. A force so strong that it felt like he was crushing my bones coursed through my arm. I cried out in pain. He paid no attention, only gave a cold glance to the panicked Henry Wood behind me, and pulled me away. "Come back with me." From beginning to end, he didn't even spare a glance for Dulcie beside him. As if she didn't exist. At the corner of the corridor, I stumbled for a moment when he pulled me, and in that moment, I hastily turned my head back. Dulcie Price stood still, her face pale. Unbeknownst to us, our positions had already been reversed. "Your end is coming soon, Ms. Price." He threw me into the bedroom with a loud bang, and in the next second, Lance's fierce kiss engulfed me. This kiss showed no mercy, almost resembling a kind of biting force. His warm fingers traced along the contours of my face, stopping at my neck and gradually tightening. The suffocating feeling gradually surged up, and I closed my eyes, letting the tears flow down and drop onto the back of his hand. Lance seemed to be burned by this, so he let go of his grip and gritted his teeth, asking me, "Why?" I didn't say anything, just silently took out my phone. I opened the recording and played it. "Miss Olsen is a smart person. You should know who Lance Wood has offended this time. To be honest, as long as you cooperate with me, what I can give you after he falls from power won't be any less than what he has now. After all, he only sees you as a substitute for Dulcie Price. But I'm different. I respect Miss Olsen and sincerely want to cooperate with you." In the recording, I gently sniffled and said, "I know. You came to see me today. Is it not for the lowest price of the contract in Lance's hands?" "Of course. But your father is still in the hospital, and the conflict between you brothers is not good for his recovery." "Miss Olsen, are you pretending or are you really this naive?" Henry laughed twice and said, "That old man favors Lance so much. Do I care about his health? If his bones weren't so stubborn, and if I hadn't switched his medication, he wouldn't have gotten sick." I rubbed my reddened eyes and explained softly, "I didn't intentionally keep it from you. I just didn't know who around you I could trust, and I was afraid of it leaking out again. He's very cautious and has contacted me several times to make sure there are no issues before arranging to meet tonight. These days, you've been running around for Dulcie and the Wood family's affairs. I thought, since you've been so good to me, I wanted to help you with something. But Henry Wood has already seen you coming here. I don't know if this recording is still useful." I felt a bit discouraged and lowered my eyelashes. "I'm sorry, I'm useless. I still couldn't help you." In the dim light of the bedroom, Lance stared at me blankly. In his eyes, there appeared a sense of confusion and helplessness for the first time. "Do I treat you well?" He snapped back to reality and seemed a bit timid as he cautiously touched my hand. "Annie, do you think I treat you well?" I nodded, tears in my eyes, and a smile formed on my lips. "You know, I don't have any family, and no one has ever treated me well. Lance, to me, you are my only and most precious relative." Lance remained silent for a moment, not saying anything, just lifting his hand. With an extremely gentle force, he brushed over the wound on my lips that he had bitten. Then he pulled me into his embrace with strength. "Don't believe what Henry Wood said. Annie, you are not a substitute for Dulcie Price. I love you." I buried my face in his chest and muttered, "Lance, don't lie to me." "I won't lie to you. But I am lying to you." "You fool." I handed the recording over to Lance. I didn't ask him how he dealt with Henry Wood's matter. All I knew was that not long after, a portion of the shares that originally belonged to Old Wood ended up in Lance's hands. In this war between brothers without gunpowder, Henry Wood was constantly retreating. As for Dulcie Price, she came to me again, 2 months later. That day, a certain blockbuster film in which I played the female lead had just finished shooting. Lance, as the biggest investor, attended the wrap party with me. But halfway through, Dulcie burst in unexpectedly. She had lost a lot of weight, her face pale. When she looked up at Lance, her eyes were filled with tears. But she stubbornly refused to let them fall. "Lance Wood, so now you want to settle the score with me, right?" Lance had initially stopped me from drinking. Upon hearing her voice, he looked up at her. Seeing her red-rimmed eyes, his fingers trembled slightly, but he didn't say a word. However, I knew he had softened once again. The bond between childhood sweethearts for over a decade wasn't so easily worn away. But it didn't matter, I would help her. Dulcie glared at me with bitter resentment in her eyes, then turned and left. On the way back, I wore Lance's coat and leaned against his shoulder, falling asleep in exhaustion. I didn't know how much time had passed when I was suddenly awakened by a piercing ringtone. "May I ask if you are the family member of Dulcie Price?" A slightly urgent voice came from the other end of the phone. "She had a car accident on the road and is currently being treated at the hospital. Please come over immediately." Lance's body, against which my face was pressed, suddenly stiffened. Annie Olsen." He shook me awake and met my sleepy eyes, pausing for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had softened considerably. "I have something to take care of right now. You should go home by yourself." Under the dim car lights, our eyes met. A clear trace of sadness flickered in my eyes, but quickly disappeared. I didn't ask anything, I just took off the suit jacket covering me, carefully helped him put it on, and then said, "Okay. You drank a lot for me tonight, and I'm worried. I'll have the driver take you home, and I'll call Shelley to come pick me up. Lance, come back home early." As I said this, something came to mind, and with a hint of shyness and anticipation, I smiled and squinted my eyes. "I have something to tell you later." I opened the car door and got out. In the rearview mirror, as the car gradually disappeared from my sight, I waved to him. Until that car completely vanished from my line of sight. I stood beneath the dark curtain of the night breeze, looking up. The sky was devoid of stars and moon. The next second, the grating sound of tires scraping against the ground echoed. A car stopped beside me, and a cloth soaked in ether covered my mouth and nose, quickly slowing down my thoughts, and then, pause. "Kevin Marz. On the day you left, did you see the stars? Did you miss me?" When I opened my eyes again, I found myself trapped in a dusty abandoned factory. Several vicious-looking strangers were standing beside me. One of them was casually wiping a dagger in his hand. He glanced at me and smiled when he saw that I had woken up. "Oh, the famous star is awake," he said. I remained silent and just stared at him quietly. He raised an eyebrow, and the long scar on his cheek made his face look incredibly sinister. The scar-faced man approached me and tapped my cheek with the dagger. "Scared, huh? If you see blood later, I bet you'll be even more scared." The others burst into laughter. Suddenly, I spoke up. "Where is Dulcie Price?" The scar-faced man stopped laughing and lowered his head. After looking at me for a couple of seconds, he smirked and said, "You're quite clever. You've figured out who you've offended. Well, on the road to the heaven, you can be a smart ghost." He was trying to frighten me, to see me panic and lose control. But I knew that Dulcie wouldn't let me die so easily. For the past 2 months, Lance had been cold and indifferent towards her. She had offended someone and upset Lance. Even the Price family no longer sided with her, instead favoring her half-sister. The once prestigious Dulcie Price had become an outcast. Dulcie hated me to the core. She would torture me at least before killing me. As expected, I was forced to drink dirty cold water for several days until she finally appeared. She was wearing a gorgeous red dress, with a stunning pink diamond necklace hanging from her fair and slender neck. Lance had bought that necklace for $120 million at an auction in H City a week ago. I knew he had originally planned to give it to me as a wrap-up gift, so I had prepared a big surprise gift for him at home. Now, Dulcie, disguised as a victim of a car accident, was wearing that necklace here. That meant Lance must have seen the prenatal examination report that I had left in the study, right? At the thought, I couldn't help but tremble with excitement. "What, are you trembling in fear?" Dulcie grabbed my hair and slapped me hard. "You shameless substitute. When you were showing off in front of me, did you ever think this day would come? Do you really think Lance loves you? Countless playthings like you have appeared by his side in the past. You were just a tool he used to flirt with me. Even if I were to really kill you now, do you think you would be willing to speak harsh words to me for your sake? You lowly peasant. Worthless plaything." Yes. To people like us, they see us as nothing more than tools for their amusement, not even human. Even if we die, it won't cause a ripple. But Dulcie Price, my lady. Unexpected things happen all the time. Just like among the thousands and millions of people they've killed, there's always a chance, however small, that one of them will turn out to be me. I didn't say anything, I just looked at her mockingly with a smile on my face. Her anger grew, and she used the pointed heel of her high-heeled shoe to kick my abdomen forcefully, one after another. The sharp pain twisted and turned, and a hot liquid flowed out from under me. The smell of blood mixed with the scent of dust, quickly making my mind hazy and heavy. In the distorted sunlight, dust danced in the air. I fell to the ground, curled up, and squinted my eyes to look over. Until a loud bang on the door. Following that was Lance's voice, "Annie." Lance just frowned at Dulcie Price. Even at this moment, he still couldn't bring himself to harm Dulcie. But it didn't matter, Dulcie would ruin everything. She stared blankly at Lance, at the angry expression on his face, and suddenly went mad. "You've been following me? Lance Wood, you've been following me. You never believed me from the beginning, did you? You thought Annie Olsen was kidnapped by me, didn't you? All those things you said about marrying me and separating from her were lies, right?" Lance took a deep breath. "Shouldn't I have doubted you? Dulcie, Annie is right here now. Shouldn't I doubt you?" Dulcie lowered her head and stared at me with intensity. After a while, she suddenly smiled. "You've been deceived by her. It doesn't matter. As long as this wretched person is dead, everything will go back to normal." She bent down, the dagger in her hand reflecting a cold light, inching closer to my neck. Bang! Lance's eyes flickered with pain, but he forcefully pushed her away. Unexpectedly, her head hit the ground hard. Hot blood spurted out, staining the ground red. Dulcie's expression froze, a mix of disbelief and extreme pain at being killed by the person she loved. It must be agonizing, Miss Price, to believe in him, to love him, only to be killed by his own hands. I closed my eyes and savored the smell of her blood in my breath. In a place where Lance couldn't see, I smiled. The clock hands turned back 2 days. I finally gained the trust of Dulcie's loyal follower, who obediently followed every command of Dulcie Price. "I know that your girlfriend was driven to madness by the campus bullying from Dulcie, which is why she jumped off the building," I said. I have a life or death situation, and I just need a small favor from you. A life or death situation? Her eyes lit up. Will Dulcie Price definitely die? No, someone will definitely die. I paused for a moment. It's either her or me. But it doesn't matter. Even if I'm the one who dies in the end, it won't be long before it's her turn. She agreed to help me by suggesting that Dulcie stage a car accident at the right time to confirm her position in Lance's heart. Before leaving, she suddenly spoke up. She's not my girlfriend, she's just someone I love. Annie Olsen, who are you doing this for? Of course, I'm doing it for the person I love. For Lance Wood and Dulcie Price, they were high above, and what they called liking was just a toy for their leisure time. Built on what interests or trampling on the corpses of ants. In any case, gains and losses must be measured, costs calculated. We are different from them. We have nothing to begin with. For this, we can pay the price of our lives. They will never understand. I woke up again, this time in the hospital. Lance was standing by the hospital bed, with a rare trace of weariness on his face. I didn't know she was so crazy. She even staged a car accident to deceive me and then kidnapped you. Annie, don't blame me, he said. I remained silent for a long time and asked him with his increasingly uneasy gaze. What about Miss Price? She conspired with someone and caused internal conflict. She was accidentally killed, Lance said calmly. The person who killed her has already been convicted. It seemed that this was the result Lance Wood and the Price family reached after negotiation regarding Dulcie's death. He must have paid a hefty price for this outcome. He once loved Dulcie to the extent that he regarded the lives of others as insignificant as grass and mustard seeds. Now that Dulcie is dead at his hands, he surprisingly shows no ripple of emotion when mentioning this matter. He was always a heartless person. I looked at Lance and asked softly, "Did you see the gift I prepared for you? Our child, our second child." His eyes unexpectedly turned red, and tears streamed down his face in an uncontrolled manner. "We will have more. Annie, we will have more children in the future. Once you recover, we will get engaged." Lance began preparing for our engagement ceremony. He didn't even propose to me. Because in his eyes, there was no such thing as someone rejecting his proposal. He purchased a collector's grade pink diamond at a high price and had it custom made into a ring that fit me perfectly. He also hired a designer to tailor a wedding dress specifically for me. The news of Annie Olsen, a second-tier actress, getting engaged to the most powerful and young master of J-City had been a hot topic on social media for several days. There were discussions everywhere online. What does Annie Olsen have that allows her to rise from an actress to a Mrs. Wood? The young master of J-City ends up marrying a mistress. How outrageous! How ridiculous! In this day and age, human life is still divided into noble and humble. Lance said he wanted to hold the grandest engagement banquet in the world for me. He ordered the most expensive gown and invited numerous wealthy and influential guests, standing side by side with me on the stage. After the master of ceremonies finished speaking, he handed the microphone to Lance first. His gaze fell directly on my face, full of deep affection. Before meeting Annie, I never thought that someone in this world would truly love me, even more than she loves herself. I was born into this kind of family, this kind of environment, always concerned with various gains and losses, but she is different. What she has given me is far more precious than what I have given her. He spoke with such sincerity and emotion, even moving himself, right? The microphone was passed to me, and I held it tightly, giving Lance a slight smile. "But, I don't love you. Lance Wood, you have killed someone. How could I fall in love with a murderer?" He stood still, as if he had turned into a statue in an instant. As if to echo my words, a video suddenly appeared on the large engagement screen being live-streamed behind him. The image was somewhat blurry, but the people in the video could still be recognized. In an abandoned factory with dust flying, Lance forcefully pushed Dulcie Price, who was not far away, to the ground. Blood splattered out, blending with her vibrant red dress. As for me, of course, due to the pain, I curled up on the ground, completely blocked by her dress and the nearby discarded machinery. The whole venue erupted in an uproar. And the wave of public opinion spread through the live broadcast, enough to crucify anyone in a shameful position. Even if this person was the young master of this city. It was as if a towering tower that had stood since the birth of the world had collapsed and crumbled in an instant. Lance turned his head to look at me in disbelief, shock and doubt flickering in his eyes. In the end, all the emotions faded away, leaving only a pool of blood-soaked despair and agony. He opened his mouth and struggled to ask me, why? Did you misunderstand something, Annie? Do we have a misunderstanding between us? His voice was almost blood-stained. I chuckled softly, there is no misunderstanding. I did it on purpose. To kill someone is to kill their heart. During the years by his side, I had also collected numerous pieces of evidence of his disregard for human life. But it wasn't enough. I was going to send Lance to jail with the evidence that he killed someone to save me. He saved me because he thought I loved him. Now that he has fallen from the clouds to the dirt, even my love for him was fake from the beginning. Trash like you, why would you ever think I could love you? I said, laughing a little brighter. Oh, I forgot to tell you, my stepbrother is Kevin Marz. You've killed so many people without a second thought, you definitely don't remember who he is. But it doesn't matter, I remember. The grand engagement banquet prepared by Lance Wood himself became a courtroom that sentenced him to prison. The situation had escalated to the point where there was no turning back. I submitted all the evidence I had collected over the years about his murders to the police. Naturally, I was subjected to the customary police interrogation. What is your relationship with Lance Wood? The officer asked. Can't you tell, officer? I smiled and said, we're enemies. As the video played on the big screen, showing Lance's moment of pain, shock, and despair, my smile never disappeared from my face. Although Dulcie Price was already dead, she had spoken a sentence before her death that was not entirely wrong. I didn't love Lance Wood. From the beginning, when I approached him, I had a different purpose. Piece by piece, the evidence of Lance's murders was presented, solid as a mountain. Even the big shot who had been threatened by him had come forward and was willing to testify against his beloved son's crimes. These people, not a single one of them is good. I take great pleasure in seeing them tear each other apart. As the routine questioning came to an end, the police slightly tapped the table and asked me, what is your relationship with the deceased Kevin Marz, who was a victim in the intentional homicide case 8 years ago, in which the suspect Lance Wood was involved as the main offender? The curve of my lips suddenly froze. It felt as if someone had squeezed my heart with force, causing a suffocating pain. I whispered, he was my stepbrother. Just be my stepbrother, Kevin Marz. I am such a despicable and vile bastard, with such sinister and hidden intentions. Apart from myself, I don't want anyone else to know my feelings for you. When autumn came that year, I was ready to leave this city. Before leaving, that police officer found me once again. He said that Lance Wood wanted to see me one last time before confessing to all his crimes. So, separated by a glass window, I sat face to face with him once more. He looked at me, as if in the desolate autumn, even his eyes were gradually turning red. Even if you want to retaliate against me, why do you demean yourself? Ha ha. He actually asked me why I demeaned myself. I smiled with narrowed eyes. Demean myself? Are you referring to willingly staying by your side, being Dulcie Price's substitute without status or name? Or is it the passionate and intimate moments we shared every night, as I tried my best to seduce and please you in bed? Don't you understand? I am an actress, and everything is just an act for me. This body is nothing more than a shell to me, and those 2 children are nothing more than lifeless flesh and blood. I don't care at all. I have no sense of shame or morality. How could I feel sad or embarrassed because of these things? From the very beginning, I had only one purpose: to send you and Dulcie Price to hell at any cost. His hands, bound by handcuffs, began to tremble violently, and even his bloodshot eyes and pale lips couldn't escape it. He asked me, you and Kevin Marz have no blood relation at all. If you forget about those things and marry me, we can have a good life. I don't want that, I replied. Losing patience, I stood up. What you call a happy life is a living hell for me. Also, my name is not Annie Olsen. My real name is Everly Black. I'm a bad seed, born bad. My biological father died in a car accident. Although he loved to drink and would beat me when he was drunk, he cherished his own life. Under normal circumstances, he wouldn't drink and ride his motorcycle, only to be hit by a truck. Uncle Marz, although a scumbag, valued his money. He wouldn't gamble for no reason. My mom is selfish and always hides her own private money very well. She wouldn't easily let Uncle Marz discover the gold jewelry she had hidden. I did all these things. I've always known that I am a morally corrupt person, but my stepbrother, Kevin Marz, is a person of noble character and integrity. And I never thought I could deserve him. I just wanted to quietly wait until I turned 18, maybe then I could escape from his side after expressing my feelings. There has never been anything good to expect in my life, but Kevin is different. He deserves a bright, fulfilling, and happy life. The person who destroys all of this will have to pay 1,000 times, 10,000 times the price. I sold all the things Lance gave me to compensate for the breach of contract. Then I said goodbye to my manager, Shelley, and returned to my hometown alone. The small town is still quiet and deserted. The milk tea shop from many years ago is still open in its original location. The milk tea made with various colorful fragrant powders is overly sweet and not tasty. But for us back then, it was already something precious. By some coincidence, I walked in and ordered a $2 taro milk tea. The boss made the milk tea while chatting with me. I didn't expect to still have business now. The nearby schools have all moved, and our shop will be demolished soon. Speaking of which, I'm quite reluctant. I opened this milk tea shop before I even came of age. It's been almost 30 years in the blink of an eye. He chattered on, and I, wearing a mask, turned impatiently. On the wall beside me, there were colorful sticky notes. Each had different handwriting. This was the popular message wall during our time. Suddenly, I remembered that I seemed to have written something on it. So I leaned over and carefully searched for it. One 5-year-old Everly Black tore off a blue sticky note and wrote on it stroke by stroke. I seem to be a terrible person. My feelings for my stepbrother are abnormal. There was no name or signature, so I thought no one would notice. But this time, I looked up. Under the blue sticky note, there was also a folded pink one. On it, there was a familiar, sharp handwriting. But my sister is the best sister in the world. It's my fault. I always think that one day in the future, she can be more than just my sister. I froze in place, and the blood in my body seemed to freeze for a moment, then flowed backward. Something passed through the layers of the rushing time and fell onto my heart, still making a deafening sound after many years. The boss walked over with a taro milk tea filled with a thick fragrance, looking at me in astonishment with tears in my eyes and a wet mask. "What's going on with you?" I wiped my teary eyes calmly and took the milk tea from his hand, thanking him calmly. "Thank you for the milk tea, it has always been delicious." After all these years, I finally came to know Kevin's feelings towards me, but it doesn't make me feel regretful either, because I will soon be able to see Kevin again.